Hey, it's Simon.
And this is Martina.
And we're broadcasting out of
Kichijoji,
Tokyo, Japan, the homeliest part of Japan.
Did you call it the homeliest?
Because it's like our home.
Home.
Right? And we are finally back now in Japan. We spent almost a month in Canada.
It's about the longest I can't think of another time that we've gone on like a vacation to Canada for a month.
Because for those of you that don't know, Martina's dad had a very long and very difficult illness. And every time we went back to Canada, it was tough.
And it was critical usually. Sometimes I went back without Simon just to take care of my dad because my mom was then hospitalized with other issues. And then so it was constantly stress. And you know, I'm not saying that this wasn't a stressful holiday season because all of us experience stress during holiday time.
It's always stressful in holidays.
But in this case, my dad died on January 4th. So we knew that it was going to be kind of like a first Christmas without my dad. And my mom had her birthday. And then we celebrated New Year's. And then my dad died. And it kind of seemed like this was going to be rough.
This was last year. So this year was the first holidays that we were going to spend back home without your dad.
I think it went pretty well.
I think this was the best Christmas we've had.
It was like... I have mixed feelings, of course, because I was sad not to have my dad around and stuff, but I tried to think of it from a different perspective, which was my dad is not suffering anymore, and my mom is not suffering, and my sister and I are not suffering that my dad is not sick and dying. We're suffering that we miss him, but we were able to kind of be really positive and on the day, his anniversary, 1 year anniversary for death, I thought of a really neat thing that we could do. We call it Dad's Way Day. Yeah. So instead of being really sad and crying, we kind of went the spudgy route. Yeah. Where I wanted to instead kind of celebrate things that my dad liked.
Memorialize them. In a way,
but in a way that wasn't cheesy, or it was just my dad was Croatian and he liked Croatian food. So why don't we eat Croatian food today? Yeah. Why don't we didn't do this, but I wanted to go watch a movie that my dad would watch.
Right. But your dad liked Kung Fu movies. He liked cowboy movies. We could have watched one of those instead of spending the day just thinking about it and being sad. This is what can we do that celebrates his memory?
Yeah. What has he taught me that I enjoyed that I can then continue on and impress onto my niece and nephew as they grow up and they know that there's going to be Dad's Way Day and Granddaddy was so cool. And I want to kind of, do that kind of a route.
And so I think this time that we spent in Canada was actually quite good. It's one of the rare times that we actually went somewhere without filming a video. We were
pretty stressed.
Yeah. It's very stressful.
It's stressful, and I missed you guys, if I have to be truthfully honest about it.
Right. We miss talking to people. We see comments from people saying, hey, where are you? We miss you. Hey, we miss you too. But we discussed in Canada, we've never gone on a vacation and not filmed something. When we went to Barcelona, when we went to Rome, we always are filming.
Vietnam, any anniversary or anything that's supposed to be a private time to kind of unwind. Yeah. I'm not saying that I'm doing things I'm having to film a video in Vietnam and we're oh, you've ruined our honeymoon. Nothing like that. I'm just saying that you have a different mindset when you're thinking about what to film and how you want to share things with people. But this time around, I was I think I should unplug. And even though I had all these urges to film things for you guys and put things up, I said to myself, I'm going to try and focus on what I'm feeling, which is feeling sad or feeling sick or dealing with my dad. I'm going to try not to escape through pleasurable work or
burying yourself in work like we can sometimes do. Instead of coping with things, or let's just work really, really hard on something and
turn my head too hard and hurt my neck there.
We didn't do that this time. And as a result, I think we had a good time in Canada. We're back in Japan now and we're ready to start filming. We're filming a podcast now, so I'm happy about that.
I'm happy with our trip to Canada, but I will not say that I'm recharged. I don't feel like I came back I'm so recharged. I'm excited to be back home. I feel like I understand my neighborhood. I get the food that I can consume. I know where things are. That's the thing, is that when you go back to your home country, since we've been living overseas now for 12 years, Canada is our home. We were born there and we did grow up there and stuff. But countries and cities change. They change and they grow, and they grow without you if you're gone. And then you coming back to visit for 2-3 weeks is really just kind of meeting the city for the first time again. So there were a couple of funny things that we experienced while we were in Canada that were new to us.
We wanted to go to Canada and view ourselves as tourists. Be we don't live here. This isn't our home. This is where we were born, but it's not our home. Let's try to experience what tourists are like.
Approach it with a positive attitude,
Let's try to experience some Canadian things. You go to Japan, you want to do Japan things. We're in Canada. What are some Canadian things? And the funny thing we found in our first 2 weeks in Canada, this epiphany came a little bit later. Every time we wanted to go eat somewhere, let's eat something Canadian. Let's get some poutine. Let's go to Tim Hortons or something like that. We'd always be no, but there's this good pho place.
There's a really good Vietnamese shop up the street that we haven't gone to in a while.
So then we went there and we loved it.
Mississauga 4.99. Whoop, 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 whoop. Dixie Road
on
in
Dixie.
Dundas.
And the next day after that, we're like, okay, no, now we're going to get something Canadian.
We're going to do something Canadian. Let's get a burger or
go for dim sum.
We could go for dim sum.
And we went down to like Roll San Dim Sum, which is on Spadina in Toronto.
It's across from the Kensington Market entranceway. Whoop, 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 Roll San.
It's the best. I want to do a little bit of a side note here. I love that place so much more now than before, thanks to, I think her name was Joyce that was working there. It was either Joy or Joyce. And Joy, because she emanated.
She had such an amazing, Joy, if you're listening, I hope it is Joy. You had such a brilliant smile. You were so happy and like you could feel the positive, I sound like such a hippie, rolling off of her. And it was the busiest day. We had already gone before. I mean,
we went on we did, this is our second time going.
Okay, so we went on New Year's Day. Very, very packed. But New Year's Day is like, you know, it's exciting to go for dim sum.
And everything else is closed, so more people are like going to the Chinese restaurants than before.
All the Chinese restaurants are like, we're not celebrating New Year's to the end of the month. Because it's like January 25th or so is like Chinese New Year, I think. But so they're just like, whatever.
And we love Roll San. Like it's really special to us. So to find that somebody that watches our video works there was delightful.
I felt like we were opposite fans. Like, she's like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you guys came here. I'm such a fan. And I'm like I'm a fan.
I love the work that you do.
You're amazing.
The dim sum episode that you did last week.
Your Hargar folds are unbelievable. Have you tried the shumai lately? Like, it's so much fun.
And it was the reason why I loved it so much was because then Joyce was like, hey, you should try this out. And she started recommending things that we've never tried before.
She said they're off menu, but they're only available till a certain time. And I was like,
there were these like crackers. It looked like two like wonton wrappers that were like put together and then deep fried, and in the middle they put shrimp and green onion and something. It was just like this cracker sandwich that was like crunchy on the outside.
And it had mayo on the side, which by the way, if you thrust me back 12 years ago and told me to dip something in mayo, I'd be like, what's wrong with you for real? And now I was like, mayonnaise.
I loved it. And every time we go back now, I'm going to order that specific thing. So thank you, Joy or Joyce, for this great memory. And the whole point of the side note is that we realized that comfort food for us is just Asian food.
We had Vietnamese food, Chinese food, then we had dim sum. I say dim sum and Chinese food separately. I know it's the same in a way, but dim sum, usually you go to like a dim sum place for it. And Chinese food, we'd go for Chinese food. We had Thai food.
Order delivery Chinese we did as well.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I went for sushi with my sister.
Right.
And I think this was the epiphany moment for me, because when I said to my sister, you know, at first we were talking about how ashamed we were that we kept going for Asian food. Like we kept being like, we need to eat more Canadian food, and we keep going back to Asian food, and we're not like opening up our minds and exploring the way that most people. We had poutine, by the way, twice.
Yes, we did.
And so we were like, you know, what else can we do? And then I went for sushi with my sister, and she was like, are you sure you want to go for sushi? She's like, this is my favorite shop, but I'm just saying, like, you live in Japan. And I told her, it's different though. Like Toronto sushi tastes different. Like Vancouver sushi tastes different.
Right.
If you have a California roll, P.S. from Vancouver, invented by a Canadian chef. Right. I don't know why he called it a California roll. Why didn't you call it a Vancouver roll? Jeez. Anyways, I had California rolls. Yeah. I had salmon. I even had salmon sashimi, and I noticed that it tasted exactly like how I remember it. Oh. It's a creamy Toronto tasting salmon. And the big epiphany I had was, remember when we found out that salmon in Japan is usually not popular because they don't eat raw salmon in Japan as it can have parasites in it. So they always bring stuff from Norway. Right. So we're technically eating Norwegian salmon in Japan. Right. They're not necessarily importing like Atlantic salmon or Toronto or Vancouver salmon. So the salmon we're having in Canada is just different location salmon. Maybe it's farm salmon. Yeah. But the point is that food tastes different in different countries.
Everywhere you go, you could make the exact same food with the exact same recipe and it'll taste completely different. Today we had our lumpies. So we usually do like spinach with lemon, apple, ginger, and mint, and we blend that all up.
You guys have seen us do those like lumpies before.
Yeah. And we drink those. We had that in Canada, but the lemons are so much more sour. Like I had to do a lot more work to try to balance out that sourness. It was just a completely different drink. You can't expect that you have one recipe here, it's going to taste the same there. It's always different.
I think it's just that we discussed this with like Chef Suga as well, and I always say the word wrong, like terroir or whatever.
Terroir, yeah, that's it.
I was like, what's terroir? Like, what does this mean? Like when I first started hearing about it with wine and grapes and all that stuff. But what I realized is it's not an artsy thing, and it's not a hipstery thing. The soil and the ground that is being producing vegetables and growing animals and all that stuff.
Yeah.
The water you use to feed your things, all of this goes into the product, the plant, the animal, and then you eat that and it affects you, right? So I had to burp and I hope you guys didn't hear it.
I didn't hear it, no.
But if you're watching the podcast,
you've seen it.
The filter stopped the burp.
It's a pop filter. It's a burp filter as well.
I burped and it was like silent. The point is that when we went to LA and we went out with our friend Jen and she took us for a really good naengmyeon in K-Town in LA, the naengmyeon broth tasted great. The noodles were the correct noodles. The beef tasted different, but it was good.
It was still acceptable.
And the cucumbers on top were totally threw me off.
Yep.
Korean cucumbers taste like Korean cucumbers. I didn't know there was a difference until I went to Korea. When you have kimbap in Korea, when you have naengmyeon in Korea, it tastes a particular way because the cucumbers were grown using Korean rain and Korean soil. So in Canada, we realized that there's all these huge differences in taste that we never even thought of before.
Right.
And we're not saying bad or good. We're just saying it's different, right?
And the point is our tastes have very much changed for an Asian palate now. We didn't have rice.
We didn't go to Tim Hortons.
Right? We didn't even go to Tim Hortons when we were in Canada. We always do.
Yeah.
But I found myself craving Asian food.
Yeah.
I wanted rice.
Yeah.
You went to hang out with your friend Mickey.
Hey, Mickey, you're so fine, you blow my mind. Hey, Mickey. It was a hilarious situation because Mickey and I messaged each other like online, and she was like, oh, I'm going to Japan this year, literally 2 days after you arrive.
I know.
Which she never really comes that often to Japan. We could have seen each other, but in the end, she was quite sick in Japan, so she couldn't. But the point is I went to her house. I hung out with her and her kids. We actually ordered pizza.
You spoke Japanese to them.
We spoke. The kids
which freaked them out.
It was amazing. Like it was this weird situation where I'm talking to like one of my best and oldest friends who I could never communicate before with in her home tongue. I only spoke to her in English, and her mom, when we found out that she had some Korean, we were like, holy cow. So when we came back from Korea, we spoke with her in Korean. And then now I was able to like speak a little bit of Japanese with her kids and a little bit of English. And we would just fluently, like Mickey and I talked like as if it was just normal. I'd be like, I think it's pretty daijobu if you think about that. But like the important thing is like you can feel super genki as long as you know that and it was just like normal conversational tone without the actual correct pronunciation of Japanese.
Sure.
You just use the word as replacement. And you and I do that all the time. I still call you yobo.
Of course.
I haven't been able to shake the Korean yobo away. We still say things like, oh my God, it's okay. It's super chua out. Like you just kind of merge it.
There's no proper way to speak language. This is all just like we're grasping at straws here, trying to find a way to get what's in here into other people's minds.
Yeah. And I had the most incredible epiphany with Mickey.
Okay.
Do you remember what she told me? She said that her whole life growing up, she had a tough time with people saying that she was apologizing too much. They would say, we're going to give her a ride home. Is it okay? Mickey said, thank you so much. Oh, sorry. And they'd be like, why are you always apologizing? And then she said to me that she realizes it's the sumimasen.
Yes.
And sumimasen in Japanese has loaded meaning.
It's not just an apology.
No, if I need to get by somebody, I can say sumimasen, which means excuse me. If I bump into somebody, I can say, oh, sumimasen. Like the way you say it, you're like, sumimasen, oh, gomenasai. Like you kind of are really more expressive about what you did wrong.
Even when I pick up a package, like when the delivery guy comes and brings something to us, like for Amazon or whatnot, like he'll give it to me and be like, sumimasen. Like, what are you apologizing? You're bringing me a gift.
Yeah.
Right? This is my birthday.
But they're trying to say, sorry for the inconvenience. Yeah. Like, I'm sorry that like I've inconvenienced
I don't even think you could translate it that because sorry isn't even the right thing. You know what I mean?
But we realized that Japan and Canada kind of work really well this way because their sumimasen culture is the closest we've ever seen for the Canadian sorry culture.
Yes.
The amount of like sorry for bumping into people or apologizing for things. I felt so naturally comfortable with it as a Canadian. But anyhow, the point is that Mickey was saying that she realized her whole life she was using substitute words in Japanese for English, and she thought that they were equal.
They're not.
But they weren't. And the thing that I brought up to her was her mom always saying to me, is that so?
Is that so?
So when I talked to her, her mom would go, oh, is that so? And I told her the epiphany I had was so desu ne. So desu means like, is kind of like a conversation mover. So if I tell Simon, if you're telling me a story like,
it's like a
like, you know, and then it caught on fire, I'd be like, oh, really? So desu ne. So. Or if you're like, it was such a hard flight, to be like, so. It's kind of like, oh my God, or oh gosh, or totally, or I get it.
It keeps it greases the conversation.
That's a nice way to say it. Yeah. A little so desu ne on there. And so Mrs. Tomato would always replace that with, is that so? Is that so? And when I was growing up, I always thought, how interesting.
Yeah.
Like most people don't.
I remember that also. I found it very weird about her saying, is that so? Is that so? I liked it, but I was a little bit,
Like I've never heard someone do that, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that growing up in Canada and having so many cultures around us with different people speaking different versions of English really kind of like greased the wheel for us to understand languages and how to learn them. Because even with your parents, like your mom will say certain phrases that I know in English isn't the right description.
Yeah.
Like she loves fantasy, but she doesn't mean fantasy like, you know, erotic fantasy or like Dungeons and Dragons. She means like imagination and colorful creativity.
Fantasy isn't the right word, but I think it might be a translation from like fantasia of like in Polish, and maybe she just using the closest translation.
For sure, but the point is that my mind is beyond open to this because my dad spoke Croatian as his first language and then English. My grandmother had such a thick accent, Baka, and Baka would always use particular words or phrases that grammatically or whatever weren't correct, but I never thought of it that way, which is why you and I always try to emphasize to people that we really hate when people judge people for language skills. I think it's a real Debbie Downer to tell somebody that they're not pronouncing something, not in a nice way is what I mean. Like there's lots of you guys that have been amazing where I first started writing things like tonkatsu instead of tonkotsu, like the difference between pork cutlet and broth, right? So thank you guys for that. That really helped me out. Like that's literally using the incorrect word.
Sure.
But if someone doesn't say something properly or the pronunciation isn't right and you're like ripping into people, I'm like, you're doing exactly what you would be doing to an immigrant in Canada. Yeah. You think I'm going to turn to my dad and tell him like his accent isn't right, or tell my grandmother like, I can't understand you. Like all that's so stupid. I never even thought any of these things. I got very distracted because two very hilarious birds.
Holy smokies.
Just landed on our balcony. There's another one up there too. See?
Oh yeah.
Hi, you guys. Are you here to get food from me? It's not me. It's the grandma next door. She feeds you. So please stop pooping on my balcony. Because it's all you do.
Not our nice grandma, by the way, a different grandma.
Yeah, she's still a nice grandma, but she stopped feeding them lately because I think they poop everywhere.
Going back to Mickey, when you saw her and you came back, you brought an onigiri. Like she made an onigiri.
Okay, so here's the funny part. Wait, so Mickey ordered pizza and I was trying to eat the pizza, but it was quite like, it was pretty heavy for me because I had just gotten back and we were trying to see Mickey ASAP because she was leaving or I was trying to. Sorry, the bird is now sitting on my watering can and totally going to take a big old dump ski on my table. But I can't shoo him away. So cute. And it's his world.
There you go. He's gone.
Okay. So Mickey was like, oh my God, Martina, I'm so sorry. Like, of course you'd want Japanese food. What was I thinking? Because she had a little bit of rice in her rice cooker. Yeah. And I said, no, it's fine, Mickey. Like, I don't need rice. I'm fine. And then she looks at me and I look at her and then I reach into the rice cooker and I like pull out the little plastic wrapped rice that she had and I like took a spoonful of it and was like, oh yeah. Yeah.
I crave rice now. And when you brought that onigiri
Mickey
back.
made Simon an onigiri.
Right. I hoovered it. I asked you first, like, hey, is you want any? You
Excuse
said
me,
no.
I'm trying to recover from you eating my special. You should have shared a bit.
You told me it was for me.
You should have.
I ain't about to beg. I was craving rice. I needed it in my system, and you brought it, and I loved it. And I think this is the weird thing that's happened to us. Something on a cellular level or a habitual level or
cellular.
Something.
I mean, every 7 years, your body kind of like all the cells die, all the blood is changed, and then your
gut bacteria changes and your cravings change.
Your tongue changes.
And I really want Japanese food always. And I always felt weird or like judgy, like whenever I heard about like Korean people when they'd go to other countries and they bring shin ramen with them and they just like eat the same food and be like, this is your chance to eat something else. I totally fell.
You're like, I apologize for having
all the
thought
people
that
I've judged. I'm so sorry. I do encourage you have an open mind
to
when
go
you travel
to
other
and
try, which we did. But the craving for Asian food, I didn't realize how strong it is in me now.
The other thing that we talked about, which was at first we felt pretty judgy on ourselves. We're like, oh my God, this is terrible. Like we're only eating Asian food. And we came to Canada to try to eat Canadian food. And then we stopped and we said, well, what the heck? This is Canadian food.
Yes.
We grew up eating Vietnamese food and Jamaican food and Chinese food and West Indian food. And we grew up eating dim sum and we grew up eating Thai food. Like, so why are
that is Canadian food.
Food.
It's not just poutine. It's not just like
hamburgers or donuts
potatoes
or
and meat. It's like, it's many different cultures. I think that's a good part of Canada.
Toronto and Vancouver, I'm sure Ottawa, Montreal, and like other parts are the same, but we only really know Toronto the best, I would say, and Pickering. It is such an unbelievable unbelievable multicultural place. I think I recently read a stat that I'm going to butcher because I can't remember it, but apparently Canada has, or like Toronto has something like the most ethnicities of people in one area.
Yeah.
Like it's like got the most amount of ethnicity. When we, like the diversity of how many different types of cultures.
Wild.
Yeah. Even mini cultures. Like you might be like Italian, you know, Croatian, like we're thinking like big name brand cultures, but they also have little tiny cultures too. Like really small places that you wouldn't think of, like, oh, they've got really good Thai Lao cuisine. And you're like, what?
Lao Thai is in a common kind of cuisine.
Yeah, exactly. So I think what we realized was to be a little bit less judgy on ourselves for eating Vietnamese food and Thai food and all that stuff, and saying that when we were in Korea and Japan, we complained so much about how they're not getting it right. And it sounds backwards to be like, I am from Toronto and I don't like the way that Korea or Japan is making my Vietnamese food. But I'm sorry, the people in Focom 99 are Vietnamese, the menu's in Vietnamese, and they can get the ingredients because Toronto caters to multicultural communities.
Right. And like that pho was great pho. And it was better than the pho I would have in Korea.
Right.
Even though Korea is significantly closer to Vietnam.
I know.
The proximity to ingredients doesn't really matter.
Right. That's a nice way to say it. So like just because you're close to the ingredients of where a country might make something authentically doesn't mean that country, just because they're Asian, knows how to make it. Like just because you're Korean or Japanese doesn't mean you know how to make Vietnamese food. Like I'm white. Am I supposed to know how to make all the European white things of the rainbow?
I also think that we just need to get rid of the word authentic when it comes to discussing cultures. I don't think it benefits anybody. Every time somebody uses authentic as a phrase, I want to be like, you don't understand. Like there's so many different things that go into this. There's not something that's purely Japanese. Like a lot of Japanese cuisine is inspired by Chinese food, right? And it's also inspired by a lot of French
European food. And
Canadian food is the same. Like it's inspired by so many different cultures. There's not one authentic, unsullied, pure country. And I don't want to use that word anymore.
I think the way to phrase it is more like if you enjoyed it or not. So I remember being on Reddit, and I had to kind of stop doing this for a while, but I used to post to our sushi. So our sushi is like a thread that talks about like sushi, right? So I'd always post all these pictures from Japan, like of the sushi we're eating. And I loved sharing it with the community because they'd share back.
Yeah.
And some people were so shitty to other people about if their sushi rolls were covered in sauces, and they'd be like, oh, that looks like garbage. Like, ugh, look at all the sauce. Like, it's not even authentic. And the person's like, well, like, fuck, I liked it, you know? And they're like, oh, you should go to Japan. And I remember writing back a couple times and being like, yeah, well, I live in Japan and that sushi looks dope.
Yeah.
It's never going to be Japanese sushi because you don't live in Japan. You live in somewhere in America. But that doesn't mean that the food you're eating tastes bad.
Right.
You can have bad food in the country you're in.
Yes.
You can authentically have crappy food in Italy.
Yes.
You can be like, this authentically sucks. Like,
you could be in a real grandma's shop in Italy making Italian food, and she could be a crappy cook.
Right. Like, why does it just mean that like everyone's an amazing chef in every country? No.
Whenever food is bad, it's not just a matter of like how close to the mark did it get. It's also an indication of how good is the chef?
Yeah.
How good are your ingredients?
Yeah.
It doesn't have anything to do with like a purity of an idea. Yeah. It's just what's your skill set? What's your resources?
Perfect example. One of my favorite chefs, who does the Kogi barbecue chuck? Roy Choi?
No.
I always mix up.
Yeah, Roy Choi does it.
Right?
Yeah,
I always get mad because there's Roy Choi and then there's David Chang. Right.
But both of them are on Netflix a lot, and both of them are very Korean, and both of them are chefs. And
it's very, but I like Roy Choi. So Roy Choi has his Kogi barbecue truck.
Yes.
When we were living in Korea, they messaged us, like his sister was like, oh, you got to come try this out. And we're like, heck yes. And we drove all the way out to find it. It was still when the Twitter world, you had to like search it down.
Yeah.
And when I first had their, Kogi was the one with the kimchi mixed into it and stuff. It was a match made in heaven. Like the tart and the spiciness and the everything about kimchi with the flavors of Mexican food, the way that they merged it together.
That's a good fusion. That's a smart fusion of ingredients that harmonize with each other well.
Yeah. And when we say fusion, it means that you've taken two things that no one would think necessarily match together, and then you went, holy heck, this is great. And so we really enjoyed that. It doesn't matter if it's like, oh, in Korea they don't know. Yeah. It tastes great. It's good food.
Is it yummy? Are you enjoying it?
Yeah. Like it's kind of like the cheese problem. Everybody on our How to Eat Ramen Like a Pro that don't know who we are will always be like, look at these dumb white people putting cheese in their food. Yeah. People in Asia don't do that. I'm like, I think Asia might use cheese more
than processed cheese.
Like a particular type of Asian tasting
the Kraft
processed
singles
cheese. But it's not Kraft.
It's not Kraft.
It's like their version of it.
Right.
It's such a distinct flavor and like it goes so well with things like dak-galbi. Like Korean dak-galbi and cheese is unbelievably good. But if you took that cheese and put it on top of pasta dish made in Italy,
wouldn't be the same.
You'd be like, this isn't the same.
Yeah.
So I think that different cultures are learning how to put things into their cuisine and make it their own.
Right.
Like you wouldn't say Korea invented cheese, you know, but they are so hardcore on the cheese train, you know, and so is Japan. They love their cheese.
They do love their cheese.
You know, when we went to Canada, we didn't have anything with cheese. You have to literally order something with cheese.
I'm trying to think. Well, poutine, right, was the only thing.
Cheese curds.
But yeah,
you had to order it. It wasn't like we got soup and it came with cheese, or we ordered this and it came with cheese. Like everything is kind of like cheeseless unless you choose to like add it. Yeah. Right. So
interesting.
I've gone on a little bit of a cheese rant here, but
a little cheesy.
The point is that we enjoyed our time in Canada.
We did.
We really love the Asian food. I miss the scene. Like I miss how Asian food in Toronto is so easily accessible.
Right. I loved the Chinese food that we had, the delivery. Like they're very different flavors. There's the Canadian Chinese food and Japanese Chinese food, very different flavors as well. I really liked having that in Canada. Going for another one of your silent burps.
If you could go ahead and keep talking instead of pointing that out to people.
Okay, so instead of food, let me change directions a little bit because we talked about food for a long time. For 25 minutes.
It's my job.
It's my job. We love food. We ate a lot of Asian food in Canada. Another thing that surprised us was driving again.
Oh, yeah.
Because in Japan, we don't own a car. We haven't driven in Japan at all. Like we've been driven around, but we were mostly just on our bikes. So having to go back to driving around in Canada was...
Because we drove in Korea.
Yeah.
And then we just stopped driving in
We
Japan.
just stopped driving. Like I had a very bad experience of driving in Korea. It was very aggressive and like so much honking and...
People don't obey the laws.
Shouting and like running of red lights. And
it was scary. It was scary. It was tense. It was like you're always worried that you're going to die. So you're constantly like, I'm going to die.
I think the 4 years that we've had here in Japan without needing to drive and with much calmer driving, like nobody honks their horn in Kichijoji. Like good luck finding. You could wait outside for months and you never hear someone honk their horn.
Even when we had our bikes today coming from the grocery store, the light was like our go, but there was a car turning and they were turning quite fast. And I was like, oh my God, they're going to hit us. And they just immediately stopped.
Yeah.
And I was like, right. People stop here.
But in Canada, just the driving was a little bit more aggressive.
Yeah.
And I just wasn't used to that aggression. Not just in like young drivers, but even in older drivers, they were very scary aggressive.
Yes. And we realized that when we lived in Korea, the driving that was aggressive, it didn't really bother us when we came back to Canada because it was like kind of like less aggressive.
Yeah.
But now that we're in Japan, we've gotten even less aggressive. So going back to Canada was a shock. And so some of our family and friends were like, well, what's the big deal? Like you've come to Canada before. Like what's the change? I'm like, the change was we were coming from Korea to Canada. And now we're coming from Japan to Canada. So your perspective can change on things just from living in a different environment.
Of course.
What?
Like if you have Korean driving at the very bottom of the driving list, Canadian driving is better. I like driving, like Japanese driving better than Canadian driving. So when you come to Canada from either direction, you're going to have a very different perception of what that is like.
We talked about that video a long time ago on like driving in Korea and how much we hated it. And then people in the comment section were like, oh, you ain't never been to blank. And so it's just like that. People who live in maybe, I think it was Vietnam, India, and China. I remember a lot of people saying they lived there and
people
it
were
was
talking
really rough.
About like driving in Africa as well.
Oh, right. So like to them, they might come to Canada and go, this is a cakewalk.
Yeah.
And come to Japan and be like, what's wrong with you people?
I talked about that with a lot of Uber drivers as well. Like if I get a drive somewhere and like, you know, we talk about, you know, where you're
from. No Uber in Korea and Japan, by the way.
How long have you been living here? You know, like we talk about Japan and whatnot. And like, you know, they say like, when I tell them that driving in Canada is great, like it's like so like open and spacious, it's not trafficky like Korea, then they're like, they totally agree because from where they came from, it was a lot more aggressive as well.
Yeah. Because Toronto's so diverse, you can talk to people from like around the world.
Yeah. I liked it.
Keep going. I wasn't trying to stop you. I was just like, yes, Canada has diversity.
The point that I wanted to get at was I wanted you to tell your story about the old lady trying to volley. This is like the setup for the spike.
I watched you. You were like, even old people. And
old people.
I don't care about your setup.
Okay.
I'll tell you the story quickly.
Yes.
My mom and I was like 3 days into Toronto and we had already seen, Simon and I, people pulling like U-turns from the far right lanes, like just disobeying the rules blatantly. And we were like, what's going on? And like honking in parking lots. People were so mad at each other. We were like, why is everyone so mad? When did this happen? Then my mom and I are we're at 6 Point Plaza, which is in Etobicoke, if you know, and there's like, we're in a middle lane, and you know when you're in a middle lane and you're waiting to merge back into the main traffic, and then there was a woman coming straight forward who wanted to turn into the parking lot. So we're both in the middle lane, and my mom is driving. She's like in her 70s.
Yeah.
And this woman that comes up to us, we're both facing each other nose-wise, right? This woman is super, super old, and she wants to turn into the parking lot, but now we're kind of too far in the middle lane that for her to use where we are.
Right.
But she can still turn.
Sure she can.
Like there was no issue.
You weren't stopping her from doing what she wanted to do.
But she wanted to be, I think, further down. Like there's a bunch of entranceways.
Right.
Well, anyways, as we're waiting for the traffic to go by so that my mom can enter traffic and leave this woman's middle lane, I kind of put my hand to be like, oh, like, sorry. Like, I'm sorry. Yeah, kind of thing. Like, you know, I'm really sorry. Well, she whips out her middle finger and then tells me, mouths the words to me, tells me to fuck off. She's like, you, and she's mouthing the words like F off, like F you.
I don't want to get demonetized, but if you said everything that you read off of her lips.
And my mom didn't notice because she's trying to merge. Right. And I was like, oh my. Ooh. And I thought to myself, like, why is this person so
angry?
You're in your 70s or 80s.
Yeah.
You're
just chill.
Like, chill. Like,
chill.
Why are you so mad at another 70-year-old woman who's in the middle lane? Like, there was no fender, nothing.
When we are like,
that was really scary.
when we're in Kichijoji and like we have a taxi that picks us up, like our street is a very tight street. Two cars cannot.
It's like a one-way.
Like it's just a one-way street. And sometimes like one car will come this way, another car will come, and they'll get face to face with each other. No one's honking. No one's frustrated. Be like, okay, we got to
solve this.
We got to solve the situation. I like that kind of collaborative. What can we do to solve this? I understand you're not a bad driver. We're just stuck here on the road. What can we do? So then like you'll like back up into like another person's driveway.
They usually back into the driveway to allow the person by.
And there's no anger at mistakes. I don't know how we get to a point in which like when we start driving that we start getting so angry at other people for their mistakes to the point that we'd yell at them as if they like punched a baby.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
there's like such an angry aggression over like parking lots. And we've gone to parking lots before that were super open. There's tons of spots. But somebody takes like someone's spot, like there's a perceived taking of it. Yeah. And it's like cars are parked, people are out to scream at each other. And I'm like, okay, so I really don't know what has happened for this car culture to happen this way.
Sure.
I think maybe because Japan has had so many people, they had to figure out how can we make this work without causing like massive chaos amongst our people.
I even felt that a little bit. Like I remember like being in a parking lot and going for a spot and someone else grabbed it and I got a little bit upset about it. And I thought, like you told me, like, why are you getting upset? You can find out that's true.
Yeah.
But is it just like when you get into an environment, you start like feeling the same kinds of thoughts that people have, the same kind of energy that they have? What is it that changes people? How did that 70-year-old woman get so angry at just like a bad maneuver?
And it wasn't even a bad maneuver. Literally nobody did anything wrong.
Yeah.
She could have still made her turn, but she couldn't because she was turning left through 3 lanes of traffic.
Yeah.
So she couldn't turn at all. My mom had to wait for the traffic to go by so she could go, and she had the right of way.
Sure.
And so turning left is never the right of way. That's why it's called the right of way. And when you're learning a country,
that's going to blow some people's minds.
It's true. I remember my teacher telling me that, my driving teacher. He's like, it's called the right of way because it means they've got the right way. They get to go first.
The person to the right.
Every police thing will be like, they had the right of way. Right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. So I think environments affect you. I think people being in their car a lot, it creates like, it's their environment. Yeah. It's like their home now and they're stuck in this home with these radio stations and this traffic and they feel so frustrated. But I kind of took it as, I kept telling my like mom and my sister the same thing as well. And with you, okay, so you can't do anything about this. Yeah. Like you're in your car and there's traffic and then you're stuck behind a streetcar, but you can't do anything about it. No. Are you going to park your car, get out, slash the tires of the cars around you, cut the wires and be like, everyone off the road and call an ambulance, and just to do what? To get home?
Right.
Everyone's trying to do the same thing. So to me, it's like, there's no point of being stressed about being in traffic. Probably this namaste happened to me because I've been driving since I was like 16 and I went through so much traffic hell going to visit Simon when he lived in North York or Pickering, and like I just had to learn how to like daijobu genchana it, like calm zuko, you know? Yeah.
So
do you think to stop recording?
I think I forgot how long we do this podcast.
Simon's gonna go check the camera because if you're listening to the podcast can go on forever.
No, camera totally stopped.
But the camera did indeed totally stop. Did you press record on the camera again?
I just
Welcome back.
Welcome back.
The camera stopped recording.
So I think for that little blank spot, what are we going to do for the audio? Are we just going to like show for the video. Show some pictures in the middle. For those of you that are watching the pod video,
you've already seen, a big black screen, and it's probably pictures of me with eczema. No, we can find some Canada photos to shove on in there.
So that's it for our little podcast. We are definitely over our time now because the camera stopped.
But there's so much stuff that we wanted to talk about, like people giving us the fingers, and like clothing,
Jamaican food that we want. No, we just want to talk more about food.
Portuguese food.
Food.
We got an Airbnb in Little Portugal
that
for like
French cafe with those donuts. Snow.
-20. When did this happen?
My teeth hurt when I went outside.
My body was like, am I not Canadian anymore? My body was like, what is this?
I know.
It was terrible to like be so un-Canadian.
Okay, so now that we're done this podcast, I got to remember how to like import this and edit this and publish this. What are all the buttons? 1 month away and it's just like all gone now.
Why am I sitting here with my hands on both of my shoulders? Like, is this comfortable for you?
No. How about this?
No.
That doesn't
maybe
work?
Shake him. Yeah, Simon's holding his own chest and he's just...
Does that feel comfortable for you?
He's jiggling them for me. He wants me to copy him, but I'm not going to do that. So I'm just going to watch him go like... Ba, 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 ba.
Welcome back to our videos, everyone.
This is what you've signed up for. Jet lagged for 2 weeks. That's what I think. 2 weeks of us.
We've been awake. It's 2:34 p.m. now. We've been awake since 2 a.m. because of jet lag. So I think this is making sense as to why it's so confusing.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
We missed you.
We missed you.
Talking to you guys.
We're going to get back to filming videos again, and we'll see you soon.
And there are going to be some changes in our videos because we're going to try to be more... like I want to do a wellness segment, which I talked to you guys about. And I'm going to try really hard to be positive about how I'm doing badly and then what I'm doing to combat it. I don't want it to be just shit. I want it to be like a shit sandwich where I'm like, this is what happens when I'm tired and this is what I do to help it. So I want us to create like a wellness conversation where this is the year where all of us can go, well, here's what I've done to help me, or here's what I've done. And we can create like a conversation that's positive.
Yeah. Let's see those happen.
In an ironic twist, I'll be too sick to do this. I'll try my hardest.